Coming at you. Busted Pencils, fully leaded. Education talk, educated educators talking education. Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, Jacob, chairman of the boards, me, Dr. Tim Slecker. Class is in session. The turkey has finally worn off. I am now fully engaging in the Christmas holiday spirit, you name it. You can't see this, but I actually took off my Santa Claus outfit. Jacob and Johnny started bullying me, and so I had to take it off. Sway Johnny and Jacob. Jacob, no, actually, I'm lumping you in with Johnny, the big, the bullying type of. You're like, hey Tim, what's with that outfit?
I think this might be a little bit of internal projection from you, Tim. I think we were all fairly positive on the Santa Claus outfit.
It's just there. But no, hey, classes in session where it's after Thanksgiving. We are moving towards, big holiday season. Black Friday's done, Small Business Saturday, Cyber Monday. I will say though, for everybody listening, I got a Cyber Monday deal on a Tuesday for a snowblower that I got from Amazon. I'm having a 24-inch gasoline, self-propelled, electric start snowblower delivered to my house because the 5 inches of wet snow I shoveled today, I will not do that again the rest of the winter. How's that for a little bit of info that maybe people don't give a crap about?
I care. I found that very interesting, Tim, because last week or whenever we had our awesome Thanksgiving shows, we were talking about Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, Cyber Monday, and you guys were all, oh, I'm above all that stuff. I don't care about getting my big deals. And then a little bit of snow falls, and Tim goes running to the giant snowblower machine. So I get it. I see what's going on here.
Johnny's got that look of going, snowblower? Really?
I've already been accused of bullying. I won't say anything about being young, spry, and in shape and shoveling snow like a good northerner does. I know, Tim, once you get to a certain age of mobility, I think it's probably a wise idea that I should have taken up years ago. But I'm stubborn. Man. I still manually remove the snow. We have piles of wet snow out here in Washington this week. So I get it, man. I'm just, stubbornly not there yet, but excited, especially as don't leave out Giving Tuesday.
Oh yeah.
You got a lot of texts and a lot of emails about that as well. So, but here we are midweek with class in session, and Tim and Jacob, you sent me a story that hadn't been on my radar, and now it is. And I'm probably spinning around as much as anyone else who's been tuned into this story. A lot of interesting angles and probably some political takes on this story we're going to jump into today for class in session. But Tim, why don't we introduce the kind of the event that you sent me, and then let's get into it as two college educators.
Right.
We both work in universities. We both taught a number of different classes, supported graduate students, worked with faculty members, and have had plenty of shows here on Busted Pencils about, what's the difference between academic freedom of speech, and good, responsible teaching. And then, what responsibilities also do students have, as they're participating in the learning activities in their classrooms. So, Tim, without keeping our listeners in the dark any longer on this, why don't you bring our listeners up to speed with the story, and then let's dive into it.
Let's dive in. First Amendment, free speech. I don't know. We're going to get into it, but University of Oklahoma student in a psychology class for an assignment wrote an essay and cited the Bible as her evidence, and this drew the University of Oklahoma to kind of respond, because The student was given a 0 by the graduate assistant who was teaching the course. University of Oklahoma has responded and said this student's First Amendment rights were violated by the 0. And so here we are now trying to figure out, First Amendment, free speech, college education, academic freedom. Johnny, you kind of laid this out in one way. This is actually for some people out there, especially looking at the article I'm looking at right now is coming from the International Business Times. University of Oklahoma responds after student given 0 for Bible cited essay sparks free speech row. And this site, you go to X, and this is, of course, been turned into a, here's the deal: nasty higher education, liberal, leftist, communists, I don't know, all of the negative things, suppressing free speech, or more importantly, maybe higher education. University of Oklahoma being a public state-run university, the Governor Stitt, jumping in and saying, wait a minute, public higher education does not violate free speech. And the instructor for this course has been put on administrative leave. A full-time professor is now teaching the course, and the student is back in no 0. Johnny, isn't this just simply an issue of saying the student didn't follow the assignment, didn't like the 0, and is now crying free speech?
Tim, I think it's a little more complex than that. Not that I'm a big fan of this, but this is the kind of cultural moment we're in, especially educators in Oklahoma or other states that have centered themselves around these kinds of controversies. And, like we've said many times before, no matter what grade you're teaching right now in this country, our classrooms have become battlegrounds for really polarized politics. And that's unfortunate both for teachers and for students. But Tim, I think I have a lot of questions about this, but also, I think I don't necessarily hate how this whole thing was handled. Like, I mean, we could get into the details of it. Like, I think media representation of this, it hints at there's an important issue to report on here, but without the depth and context of like why or how often, graduate instructors may be removed from teaching their course, maybe as a protective measure to the graduate student, or, a conflict of interest in that being that the university's responsibility is to the education of both students, undergrads maybe in this class, as well as graduate students who, as part of their education, take on the responsibility of teaching undergrads. So we have learners in 2 categories here: graduate student instructor and undergraduate student. These oftentimes get messy, and graduate student instructors don't have decades of teaching experience in the front lines of these political battlefields. So, I'm not even sure that the graduate instructor did anything quote unquote wrong here. Like you're saying, like they, defined an assignment, and I believe it was like a 600-word essay, to engage with an article. I think we have the rubric we can pull up and look at too, but and the student wrote it in a particular way that I agree didn't follow the assignment as it was intended.
So the assignment, we're talking about just a little bit more of the factual. A psychology class, psychology dealing specifically with lifespan development. The students were asked to respond to a research article about gender norms and mental health. The student responded that we should not be messing with gender norms, and cited the Bible as her evidence for why God's original plan was not to necessarily debate gender norms. She's claiming she cited, therefore, her evidence was the Bible for her position. The graduate assistant is saying the Bible and religious beliefs are not evidence that come from this article and the science around psychology, lifespan development, and gender roles. And so the student received a zero. Now the zero is being kind of placed on hold. The graduate assistant has been put on administrative leave. We're trying to figure this out. And I said, the evidence that or the argument right now is that this student's free speech rights were violated by giving this zero. And I want to kind of frame it this way first. And of course, it's me taking a contrary position, maybe just for the sake of having a better discussion. It may not be my real position, but when I was in fifth grade and I was assigned to write an article about the solar system and the universe, I had to actually go into my fifth grade science book and use the science book to help me write my paragraph. And I didn't have any ability to say, well, Mars is actually a candy bar, Venus is the goddess of sex, and the rest of that. You know why? Because, hey, it's my free speech to say whatever I want.
Well, Tim, your contrary belief is apples and oranges in this context, because you just said the assignment was to write about social, right? Let's talk about social, which is socially constructed in culture. So understandings of social gender roles. And I mean, this is going to maybe also be not a contrary, but maybe a hot take or an unpopular one. The Bible actually is a text that has a pretty strong influence on societal norms. Now, that doesn't mean you have to agree with those norms or that you might not be opposed to them. But I mean, if the assignment was framed as, to write an essay about societal gender roles, the Bible is actually a text that has quite a lot of things to say, but it certainly is also packed with, influences on society's gender roles. Okay. I mean, we'd be bad teachers to say it doesn't. Now we might not agree with it, or it might not be, categorized in our understanding as a scientific text. So, if this is a science course like psychology, then maybe say if the prompt was provide scientific evidence or draw on scientific consensus to write about gender roles, right? But also gender is socially constructed, right? And so, there is a biological component to this as well as like a social and cultural component. So it seems like to me a really thoughtful and thought-engaging assignment for students in a psychology class would totally fit into, hey, write an essay about societal norms and gender roles. And you might not get essay responses that align with your politics or my politics. And I'm assuming the politics of the instructor. And I would agree with you, Tim. I'm not sure the Bible would be the best single reference for that essay. I haven't seen the essay yet. Like I said, I'm late to this story. It's off my radar. But I certainly, as a professor of cultural studies, would situate myself as saying, well, the Bible actually is a pretty important text influencing societal norms in culture. That doesn't say I agree or I make you agree with it, but the assignment itself, the right to have that belief, I think it fits because it certainly does have an influence on how we do gender in society, but also, it might not be what the intention of the assignment was. So to get a 0 on it seems kind of extreme.
Okay, but fine. I agree with everything you said. I think you're 100% right. But this is not, to me, a violation of this student's free speech. What you said was saying the student had the right, had the ability, had even the potential to engage in a conversation around societal's way of looking at gender,
Mhm.
and that Bible is a perfectly appropriate evidence. But to turn this into the simplicity of, and this is where I get, coming at this, I am worried and concerned about how we very simply turn this into, again, higher education, college, professors. And we haven't even gotten into the specifics of who this graduate assistant was or not, but just simply saying, here we go again, colleges and universities violating free speech rights of students because of their own ideological stances. I don't see this as a free speech, because this isn't the government suppressing speech. This is an educational institution asking for an essay that maybe not as clearly as it should have been, but citing empirical evidence to make the point. So, all of this, the depth of the conversation, the philosophy, the politics of where you stand on gender and all those things, all interesting concepts, but don't go on to X and simply say that here we go again, colleges violating free speech. Before you go, though, I want producer Jacob to jump in.
Well, Tim, I'm wondering, and this is what I thought as soon as I heard that this was going to be a free speech argument over this issue. I'm wondering, is this not more of a situation where it's just whether it's about your opinion or it's because, this student cut me off in the parking lot and then I gave them a grade they didn't deserve? Is this more about, perhaps the grade being inappropriate for the work rather than it being about, oh, I have a right to say whatever I want? Is this more a cut and dry, look at the rubric, you probably should have got at least 10 points for being on topic and writing complete sentences, and the 0 was unjustified, rather than a grand, big argument about, oh, you're right to say whatever you want on an assignment? Because I think if the wording was like you're talking about, Tim, saying it needs to be empirical, scientifically cited information, I don't think we would even be having this fight. Maybe some people would still bring it up, but it wouldn't be the interesting thing worth having a big discussion that it is.
Well, or Jacob, it could be because maybe there's a political assertion here that the Bible is science. It is scientific
sure.
evidence, So I think we might still be here. Tim, I agree with you too, even though I'm a little more like shocking, complicating the issue deeper than it probably needs to be. But I agree with the sentiment of saying, like, do we have an accurate, like line of inquiry here on why this is a problem? There's a few different problems, and they happen all the time. Like we assign, we have an assignment of our class, especially as a novice teacher. It's nothing against. I don't have the facts, so I don't know that. I for fact can say that this is a graduate instructor as a novice teacher, but in general, graduate instructors are learning to teach college as part of their graduate studies. So I would hold space for the instructor as a learner, which I'm pretty, from what I'm reading, pretty sure it sounds like Oklahoma could maybe do a little better job with, but and their effort might be there. But the part where you're saying, is it really a free speech issue? I think it's enough of a free speech issue that it's sort of like low-hanging fruit for a political agenda, which might be what you're getting at here, to further turn a learning space into a political battleground,
Right.
which is, again, what we talk about, whatever age it is. We can talk about like teaching about consent as a concept in kindergarten isn't teaching kindergartners about sex, but it's a concept that is related to and builds up to how you give permission or consent for what you drink, for what you eat, for like how you interact. And it builds up, but it could be categorized often as it was, in many states that, liberals are trying to teach kindergartners about sex. This is similarly reminding me of that kind of thing. It's tangent enough to it because the topic about gender norms is political, right?
Mhm.
It's highly politicized in this, culture war, if we may call it that. So it centers the battleground in the classroom, which is exactly what particular politicians, and this is why I always cringe when I say this, because I know there are great people and great teachers in
Mhm.
Oklahoma, but education keeps making the headlines in a real particular way from Oklahoma, which is not always representative of like the many great teachers that are there, rather the political landscape of that state's educational politics right now.
Mhm.
So I think I'm in a complicated way, Tim, getting to the point where I'm saying, like, this is a learning moment for the student, a learning moment for the instructor, a learning moment for the university that's highly politicized around a more culture war favorite of
Right.
like academic freedom and freedom of speech. And not saying like the student is at fault for, I don't
No.
agree with the student writing the essay. I don't agree with the stance in the essay. But here we have a scenario where we learn to follow the channels of, they say, I got a 0. Well, that I agree. I think a 0 is probably an unfair grade.
Right.
But what options does the student have? Right. In this moment, we've turned these things into, hey, if you have a problem in your classroom, report it right to this site that investigates and digs in. So we've created this like super surveillance system around culture war politics, not around learning,
No.
not around making mistakes or having different views. Right. And the student in every way has a right to have that view. Maybe they are in full agreement with what they wrote in the essay. They have that right.
Sure, they
Right?
do.
So-
They have that right, and everything you just talked about. Maybe this is where I'm trying to go with this. Is what a wonderful opportunity this would be to talk across political enemy lines about, actually, in fact, let's drop the enemy lines of politics and talk about saying, in a democracy, conversations about potentially societal implications, personal implications, religious implications, my own identity as a person in this world, an institution of higher education, a grading situation. All of this is such a rich, interesting conversation about religious freedom, religious potential, anti-indoctrination, all of this. But the simplicity of turning it into a violation of free speech by a student who was just pointing out how it's like it so diminishes and continues to amp up negativity to score political wins, to turn people against other people, to frame, here again, and for this and for us, educators, in this case, higher education, but here we go, public education, again, higher public education, as really doing nothing but insisting on some form of indoctrination to the point that we would violate the First Amendment. And it's like, no, this is an issue that has depth, that has a learning opportunity for us. It has an ability to actually explore legitimately a student's deeply held religious beliefs and why they think what they think, why a faculty member, or in this case, a graduate assistant, maybe had an opportunity to be more specific in the assignment, understanding what the intentions were. It's just we don't want to have, or I don't say we've lost the ability to see opportunities to have conversations around things that we, at the end of it, will probably even disagree, but not see this as, a big monster trying to squash individual liberties, as opposed to, like, hey, you know what? This graduate assistant who is herself identifies transgender, not identify is transgender, identifies as a woman, she, they, there's probably some points here too that we need to consider from their point of view, the student's point of view. We've just taken all these opportunities to get a deeper understanding of who we each are, and it's simply now been, and you said this right, in the cultural political battlefield, this is one more area where we can point out, some form of a victim and some form of an enemy. And if you're on the enemy side, you're happy. If you're it's just a mess. And I'm tired. I'm tired of taking something and making it so simple as, here it is, a violation of the First Amendment. Wait a minute. Let's understand the First Amendment, and then let's dig into this, because this may be a deeply held great debate about students' abilities to say what they want. The other point, we haven't even got to this, and I don't want to for this, but a faculty member or graduate assistant's rights to actually practice academic freedom and be able to say, I'm in charge of this class, and here are these, like, it's, but I don't want to go there anymore, John. I'm just, come on, stop jumping on X and scoring a cheap political win, when the reality is that this is a whole lot to do with a lot of deeply held feelings and senses of the world. This isn't just a big liberal institution squashing the First Amendment rights of students just out there trying to live their lives the way they want to feel it. That's all I'm saying.
And if I could read this real quick, it's the statement that the University of Oklahoma put out. They said the university takes seriously concerns involving the First Amendment, and they certainly include religious freedoms in that. Upon receiving notice from the student on the grading of an assignment, the university immediately began a full review of the situation and has acted swiftly to address the matter. The college acted immediately to address the academic issue, and they've been in contact ever since first hearing about it. So it sounds to me, Tim and Johnny, that this story of this big, scary, runaway, woke liberal institution, the actual story is that it was reported in the right way, not on Twitter and not on going to Turning Point USA. The actual process seems to have worked fairly well. It seems that somebody had a concern about a class they're in, they reported it, and the university took it seriously. And the part of this outside of the school where, now it's being dealt with, but I'm going to go on Fox News and get my interview, and it blows up around the whole country and the world, that seems extra to the actual thing that happened, which is, it sounds like it's a fairly benign thing that was dealt with in the moment, and everyone acted fairly well. As far as I can see. I'm not an educator. Maybe you can tell me what the process should be for things like this, but it sounds like they had something in place and it kind of went okay.
No, yeah. Well, I agree 100%. In fact, that's the story. The story isn't a violation of the First Amendment. The story is about the process and how it was followed to address this student's concern and to put it into an internal process that, is still ongoing. So yes, thank you, Jacob. Johnny.
Yeah, I'm learning about this as I'm getting information. As I said, this story was off my radar, but I agree with Jacob here too, and I agree with what I'm reading as we're having this conversation about the instructor's perspective. This is a learning opportunity for all parts, and I hope that our classrooms can be more spaces where they can be learning opportunities to have these discussions and work through them rather than blown up into these, like you said, Tim, two sides. There's a winner, there's a loser, and the loser better get punished. Right. So,
Right.
so it's just a bad way to do any kind of, education, let alone democracy. So that's sort of the moment that it seems like it's ignited in. But I also like how Jacob highlighted, that sometimes you feel like you get an unfair grade. And that's why there are systems in place to look into that, take it really seriously. It doesn't sound like the university said anybody's wrong, right? There's space for both, like you said, Tim, the instructor's right to do their job and responsibility, which sounds like she did her responsibilities. I agree with her comments on the grading. I might not agree with the grade, but that's not necessarily, I might, even my grade would still be a bad grade. So we're not that far off from one another here on this. Like, it might not be a 0. That's because I'm maybe a little bit of a softie, but it would definitely be a redo, or it would definitely be like, here's where you really missed the mark on the importance of this assignment and what I need you to do. And it still might have ended up in this kind of dispute. But every university I've ever worked with or talked to people who work at, right, has systems in place to sort these things out democratically, right? And I think, Oklahoma University, from what I can see, great job sorting it out.
Yeah.
Great job taking care of both of your students in this context. Maybe we could always do a little better, but that's all of us in higher ed. So hopefully, as a society, since we're talking about essays on societal norms, can break the societal norm, Tim, that you talked about. It's immediately a freedom of speech issue. And it's immediately that there's someone who's right and someone who's wrong, and somebody figure it out and punish the person who's wrong, please.
Yes.
And that, and this is, again, is the context, like class in session today. How do classrooms become political battlefields? This is a great example of it, like a learning moment, a common thing that happens in classrooms where we ought to disagree. That's sort of the essence of being in a learning space. That's the essence of democracy, figuring out where we disagree and how we disagree, right? And being able to do that together turns really quickly into us versus them kind of stuff. The last thing I'll add, Tim, before we end class today, though, is, I agree with the academic freedom and the freedom of speech for professors and for instructors, which they themselves are also often students.
Right.
But Tim, I also have to point out that there is a power dynamic that we as professors have, as academics, as scholars, and as teachers, that, we probably have a little less, I would say, free speech leeway, because we kind of have discerned these things. We have thought through them. You can't just say whatever as a professor.
Right.
And you can't just say whatever as a student, but I would argue there's a lot more leeway in place given that power dynamic. Like, hey, I'm an expert on this topic teaching a course that you're taking. And so, yes, I may sometimes get things wrong in terms of maybe like what I do, or we may disagree, but I'm the authority on stuff like here. Like, I think that's what you're pointing to. Like, I can't just say, oh, I like this comic book, even though, sometimes comic books can also be a source, but I can't just pick whatever and make it, relevant to my topic in the classroom. I have responsibility to the scientific consensus of whatever that field is I'm teaching the course on. Right. And so I agree with it, but I gets into murky areas for me. And I always want to emphasize, like, leeway to students. They're here to learn. Graduate instructors are also students. So there's a little less leeway because they're pretty expert on their topics. But, there is a power dynamic. So as a professor, I feel like I ought to have a little bit more regulation on what I can and can't include in free speech in my classroom, right? If that makes sense. Like I can't bring in my personal beliefs.
Well, which is why you're, yeah, and again, we're going, a lot of class in session for this one, but and again, let's have another show, because academic freedom and freedom of speech,
Two different things.
yeah, two different things, and we need to get that pointed out right there, because I don't have free speech rights when I'm teaching to just say whatever I want. I have academic freedom to be within the realm of my expertise and the scientific consensus. Lots going on. Really, really, though, let's look at the University of Oklahoma and all the other institutions. And I've been at a few. They all have policies and procedures that allow these things to play out in ways that are so much more democratic, nurturing, conversational than just simply finding out who the victim and who the oppressor is and making sure you get out to X or Fox News and get your point out there. That's not democracy. That's not how we live in a society. But now it's time for your moment of Zen. History can untie our minds, our bodies, our disposition to move, to engage life rather than contemplating it as an outsider.
Thank you for listening to today's Class in Session. And if you want more Busted Pencils podcast, just go on over to Apple, Spotify, or you can always get at us at civicmedia.com or find us on the bustedpencils.com website. Remember, you can find great Busted Pencils content every Monday for Homeroom, Wednesdays for Class in Session, and Fridays for producer Jacob's Choice. And of course, Pencil Busters, you can always tune in on Saturday and listen to the Busted Pencils weekend broadcast at 3 p.m. Central Time across all the Civic Media networks for 1 hour of your favorite blue-collar scholars, Tim and Johnny, and keep busting pencils.